Hello, we are live, I believe, just waiting for the stream to connect. We have a stream connected, it appears everything's going. Hello everyone, welcome to, I think this is video 3 of the obstacle riding series. My name is Neil Price, my channel is Trials and Enduro Skills, and this channel is here to help you ride better, ride different. Tonight, sorry, not tonight, in this session, I know depending on where you are in the world, it may not be nighttime. This session, we are looking into punch technique. So we're going to delve a bit deeper into this technique. The previous video was RSG and ride technique. Now this one is really important for your clarity. This will clarify the map a bit more, and once you see what we're talking about tonight, it'll make sense for what other coaches are often saying and what other riders are often doing, especially the higher level riders. It'll start to make much more sense for you. So in this series, the first, say, 5 videos or so are very big picture, low resolution videos. This is just giving you the overall map. Then beyond that, we'll start getting a bit deeper into different bits and pieces. Now, a number of people during the week have been asking me about slow-mos and the supporting documents and PDFs and that. They're all going to be housed on my website, which is trialsandenduro.com. So head over there. They're not up there yet, but they're going to go up and more content will fill in there. So you'll get to see them there. I don't want to fill up live streams and long edits with reference material. That way you'll be able to go directly to the reference piece you want to look at, like a slow-mo, and you'll be able to watch it over and over and just see that bit and not have to scroll through. So a really big thank you to everyone who's jumped on and given us comments and everything else and asked questions. Those of you who have asked questions or sent messages, my apologies, we've had heaps coming in during the week, so I haven't been able to respond to everyone. So without further ado, I will kick on. So tonight, we're going to, first of all, cover the lift mechanism again, which is important to clarify that. We're going to talk about how we adjust with punch technique. We're going to look at pure technique punch versus non-pure, which will make sense once we get into it. The 2 ways that you can achieve stop or containment on the bike, and the 3 ways that you can punch the front or touch the front. We're going to compare trials versus enduro, which is a really big contextual one for anyone who's doing hard enduro or enduro stuff. And then we're going to look at a really simple, effective blending of ride and punch. And then we'll just look at briefly at the learning process, and then that'll be the night done. So first of all, I want to take you back to the previous video, one of the early videos where we talked about how the lift mechanism works. And it's a really important point that you always come back to this lift mechanism itself and how that actually works. So I'll first of all move this enduro bike out of the way and get my trials bike into position just because it's a bit lighter, a bit easier for me to use. Whoop. Now, again, I want you to imagine, like I said last time, that you've ridden in and you've lifted and placed your front wheel on this log. And when we've done it, we've then pushed down into the bike. So we've lifted our body and pushed down into it. And the pushing down into the bike has compressed the forks and compressed the back of the bike. The front brake is on and the bike is fully contained against the log. And at the moment that you go to release the clutch, the bike cannot move forward and the chain tension cannot pull the back of the bike down. So when we go to release that energy, there is nowhere for the energy to escape. On top of that, you've pushed down into the bike with straight arms and straight legs. So the bike is completely contained under your body weight as well. Now at that moment, if you're going to release the clutch, where does the energy go? And there's only one path left for it to take, and that is for the front sprocket to actually initiate the rotation around the rear sprocket, because the back wheel is bound and it can't move. Now you may have experienced this on your bike at some point in time if you've ever jammed your rear tire in a gap. Sometimes your rear wheel will just get jammed in against a rock or a log or whatnot, and you just cannot move that rear tire. If you've ever been in that position and let go of the clutch, you'll notice that the bike just wants to rotate around the rear wheel. It just wants to spin back like that. And when you do it, you'll also notice that when you let the clutch out, even if the bike's just at idle, it really uses all the energy that's available. It's quite violent when it does it. And that's what occurs here. When we release the clutch, that energy pushes the sprocket straight up and it initiates an arc around the rear sprocket. Now, the very, very first portion of that arc is, of course, practically vertical. Just the tiniest little part of it is straight up and down. And that force pushes straight up until your front wheel breaks free of the obstacle. Once the front wheel breaks free of the containment, the bike can go forward as well. So you get this big hit of like all the energy that's coming from the motor very efficiently. So everything that's available to the motor only has that one path to go. So it pushes straight up, and it's pushing straight up right near your feet. So it transfers directly through your body. So you get this really effective lift upwards, and it becomes very level because it's pushing in the center of the bike, which is a key characteristic to this technique. Now, what happens is you get a very short instant hit, and then a split second later, the front wheel breaks free. Now, if you remember back, I said that all obstacle riding is lift plus the forward movement. So we've got forward movement and the actual lift vector, and the two of those forces balanced out is your lift trajectory. So this gives you a big hit of energy, and then the bike will push forward from that. So I will move over to the computer, and I'm going to show you a slow motion version of this on the trials bike. So we'll jump over here on the computer and camera 2. So whoop, that camera's dropped off. So do you mind just screen mirroring that one again to
screen mirroring?
Swipe down and top normal and look for screen mirroring on there. So in this video here, if I jump to this one, full program, you'll see that I've started the video a little bit early. So my front wheel is already in the air, and we've lost a camera, unfortunately. We'll have to do without it. So my front wheel's in the air here already, and I'm going to drop the front wheel down onto the log. And you'll see as I come in and drop, my body weight and the bike is falling, the front hits here, and I push down into the bike. And this is the moment, as I've talked about on just a second ago, my legs are pushing into the pegs, my arms are pushing down. A really big point is that the elbows are low, and it's not high elbows, it's actually like very much a tricep action pushing down. The front suspension is completely locked in. It's compressed completely. The front wheel is against the obstacle. The front brake is turned on. The back tire is fully compressed under my body weight, and the rear shock is fully compressed. So there is nowhere for the energy to go at the moment except to push upwards, straight up. So from this moment, the bike, as I release the clutch, you can see here, if I zoom in, you'll see that my clutch finger will begin to release there. And as it does, the bike will lift and push. And you can see that the bike is not overly rotating. There's a little bit at the beginning as it responds to the log itself, but there's very little push up, very little push forward and very little rotation. So what we have here is, get rid of that arrow, we have a short but very strong push this way and a bit of push this way. And then the outcome is something like that. And you can see that front sprocket's roughly following my very inaccurate arrow that I just drew, and then lands on top. So in there you can see how that bike comes into containment. It locks up, that energy can't go anywhere else. We've got everything locking that up. It's a very, very efficient technique. The bike, it doesn't need very little, doesn't need much energy at all because it only has that one path to go. You're not losing energy anywhere else. Now the lift is quite vertical. It hits you very vertically. And one of the key things with punch technique is that it's very easy to actually, once you've really got the technique right, it's actually very easy to overdo the lift and get too much lift. At all times, we're actually not achieving the maximum lift potential, because if we did, the bike would just go straight up and you'd come straight back down. So we're always actually having to soften the amount of actual lift that we're getting so we allow the bike to move forward. So hopefully that clarifies the picture for you as to how the mechanism actually generates the lift. Now that there is the closest thing to what I would call pure punch. If you remember back to the triangular spectrum, that is the obstacle riding spectrum, on each point you have ride, splat, and you have punch technique. Now, the purest form is on the tip of those triangles. So it's absolutely the purest maximum lift from that one lift mechanism. But the reality is that we often blend all of these things. That is as close as you can get to the purest form of punch. Now, when we are doing the purest form, it's actually quite low with the front wheel. So when we're going to ride an obstacle, it's not a really high obstacle, because as you take your front wheel up the obstacle, it's less stop of the rear. The front needs to be kind of into the obstacle a little bit to stop the forward push from the bike. If you get too high, the bike can actually push forward, so you won't get the lift. The rear tire will be able to drive underneath it. So if you go too high, it'll reduce the lift. As we get lower, we'll get more stop from the obstacle. So the height of an obstacle for pure punch is actually fairly low. Now, when we are going to adjust this, now, like I said, all of the energy from the motor is available to push you upwards. This means we don't need a lot of RPM. We don't need a lot of power from the motor. Have you ever noticed that how the high-level riders do this technique and you barely hear their motor? It's very very, very low, because you need very little. And and this is why I call it punch specifically, is because when you're going to adjust the height, you don't adjust on the power. You don't increase more or less. You have to have enough available. So the higher you're going to lift the bike, the more you need available. So you need a minimum amount of energy from the motor to lift you the height that you're going. But that's not how we adjust it. The way we adjust is by more or less stop of the bike. And I want to just briefly touch on the idea of containment. So when we're trying to stop the bike, I want to give you a little analogy. It's kind of like imagine you had a pipe that was running water out of it, a hose tap. You could put your hand on the end of that hose tap and you could contain the pressure of the water. But then eventually it's going to be too much and you've got to let it go. And that, I know it sounds silly, I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but that's ultimately what we're doing. If you are able to put more stop into it and contain more pressure, you'll actually get a bigger hit of energy at the end. If you create less containment, if you allow some to slip past, the pressure release won't be as much because some of it's already being released. So maybe it's a bad analogy, but hopefully that helps and makes some sense, as I'm going to touch on in a minute. Now, what I'll do is I'll jump on the bike now, and I'm just going to ride through a couple of times and show you what is essentially some pure versions of punch. I'm going to do these all on the trials bike. Don't worry, I'm going to get to the enduro bike in a sec as well. But this will give you a better idea in your head of the containment. Because we'll have a bit of audio here, you'll hear the revs in the bike also. small log here, I'm going to lift and drop and really compress into the bike to create that lift. It's only quite a small log and it's easy to kind of create enough lift to actually lift over it. If I'm going to punch on this concrete block, I've got to lift quite a lot higher, so I'll have to raise the RPM more. I'll have to have more availability, but the stop of the front wheel is what's going to make the adjustment for the lift. So I'm going to hit it first really low and get a lot of stop, which will create more lift. And then I'm going to hit the front wheel a little bit higher, and you'll see that there'll be a little more rotation and a little bit less lift, and the bike will ride up the step more than actually punching. That one was quite a lot of lift. I'll do that again. Nice and low with the front, and the lift will be very vertical. Bit out of time there. Now I'm going to hit a little bit higher, and you'll see that there'll be less lift and a little more rotation. Whoop. That was way higher. So hopefully that makes sense so far. Is there any questions at all, Jess?
No, not yet.
If you are on the stream tonight, jump in and say hello. If you have any questions as we go, jump in, ask away, and then Jess can read them out and we can answer them in the stream. So I've been talking so far about pure punch, and sometimes we don't do it quite so purely. So we will lift and we will hit the front end, and we don't necessarily fully compress the bike. And we can still actually generate the lift out of this. Now, essentially, what we can do is we can either stop the bike and then deliver the energy, or we can have the energy being delivered and then bring the bike to a stop. So if you go back to the analogy about the water pipe, I could put my hand over the pipe and then turn the tap on, and I'd be containing it to the point I have to release, and then bang, it goes. Or I could have the water pipe already running and then put my hand over it and contain what is already moving until it bursts and release. Now, I'm going to get a bit wet in the process in the second one, but it still works the same. So what I mean by this, and to give you a riding example, is that sometimes the stop, completely stopping the bike and then releasing the energy is quite obvious. We're doing this all the time in demos and whatnot. But sometimes we're riding up a hill, and you're riding up the hill and it's slippery, and you don't necessarily have lots of traction, and you have to maintain the momentum to keep carrying. And then you approach a log, say, that's a little bit undercut on the hill. And when you're coming up that hill, you don't have time to raise the RPM and hit the front, bring the bike to a stop and pop the clutch, and you need to carry a bit of momentum through the action. So what you'll do instead is you literally just let the bike keep riding, and you'll hit the front touch, you'll let the front touch, and then you'll bring the bike to a stop whilst you're still driving. So you don't change the drive at all, and you bring the bike to a stop, and then it'll go from that. So you're containing it via moving and riding into it. It sounds a bit confusing, but what it means from that is that it's the stop that is adjusting the lift. It is not the power, because in that moment you can't necessarily deliver any more power. You can do this actually completely on the throttle or on the clutch, provided you can control how you contain the energy that's being delivered. So I'm sorry to harp on about this, but it's a really important point in it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to demonstrate it now without the clutch. Now this is quite a hard thing to do, but I'm going to try and show it here. I'm not going to use the clutch, and I'm going to use just the throttle. Now on the small log, it's a little safer to demo, but it won't be quite as high because the throttle's not as efficient and effective, but you should see and hear the lift. Just very short and sharp. Because on the throttle we can't stop the bike, it's very fast. And now on the bigger concrete, again, it's not very well timed on my behalf, but I think you'll get the picture. You got to stuff up the demos, don't you? One more. So it can actually work on the throttle. This obstacle here is quite ramped, so there's not a lot of stop. If the face was more vertical, I would get more stop of the bike. And when you do it on the throttle, it's kind of like overcoming a toggle. And when you feel it, you'll feel it contain and then lift from that. But on the throttle, it's nowhere near as effective or as efficient as it is on the clutch. There's a question there?
Yes, from @Schmicko80. Hi guys, so essentially, is it the front wheel placement that has the most effect?
Yes, so I'm going to talk about the stops literally right now and how we actually stop them. So you can stop the bike in a range of ways. One is that you can adjust via the front brake. So for example, this log here, I could land the front wheel on top and use the brake to stop the bike. Sometimes we lift onto a log, we've run out of a bit of space, we've made a mistake. We land on top and we can be hard on the front brake and the rear brake if you want, and we can use that to stop the bike. It's not going to be as effective as the obstacle itself, but it can still work. The other one is, of course, the obstacle. The obstacle's the most effective way to do that, because the obstacle's generally always going to be able to give you back the equal and opposite force that you put into it, so it can really stop and contain you. It makes a really big difference. And depending on the cross-sectional shape of the obstacle, you might hit in different spots. So obviously, the lower you go, the more stop you get. The higher you go, the less stop you get. But sometimes down low, there might be a bit of a lip that's providing too much stop, and you may need to be above that or whatnot. So there can be different cross-sectional shapes of the obstacle that'll change and affect that. And of course, you can use your front brake with the obstacle combined to affect that. You can also use your body mass. So we can lift and drop, preload our body. This is where preloading is effective, but it must be timed really well. When we push into the bike, our body mass provides that equal and opposite force, so we can push down in. And that's extra loading, compressing the bike and pushing it in against the obstacle. So that's one of the ways we can adjust it. And of course, all of these go in reverse as well. So if I don't want quite so much stop, I can actually just take a bit of pressure off with my arms and legs. Now with the arms, this is very much an elbows down action. It's not elbows high at all. We want to be elbows down, and it's very much a tricep action, because when your elbows up, you tend to push the bike forward and not down. So it tends to be more elbows down than elbows up in this action. When we push with our legs and our arms, we can sometimes, this is a much higher level, sometimes we might push a bit more with our arms, sometimes we might push a little more with our legs to balance out the movement. So we can affect the obstacle as well by either lifting and dropping our body into the obstacle. We can use the momentum to ride into the obstacle, or we can lift and touch on the way through. So they're the three different ways that you can touch your front against the obstacle. So when I say this, the lift and drop of the body is that preloading idea, like I did here, where I picked the front wheel up and I dropped it down and I hit and I compressed fully, like the pure punch example. The other way is riding in. So we can actually use the momentum to improve and affect that stop on the bike. So I'll give you a little demo. Sorry, Jess, there wasn't other questions as well, was there?
No, we've just got the little fuzziness on the line.
Oh, yeah, yep. So momentum-wise, so I could lift and drop like that. With an obstacle like this, that would probably create a bit too much, as you've seen. Like I got some really effective lift earlier. I was lifting and dropping to get heaps. But here we probably wouldn't want to use too much. So instead, particularly because I've got a nice clean run up, I could lift and ride into it a bit. So it's like, using the momentum of my body and the bike to compress the forks and bring the bike to a stop. The front brake will be on when I hit the obstacle. And it works really, really effectively. So lifting and dropping, which I call the McDonald's arch, because your front wheel does a big arch like that, a big lift and a drop, and it's less about movement forward, but about getting height with the front wheel. So then the bike's mass and the rider mass is falling down onto the front wheel. The second one is the momentum. So we're riding into the step, okay? And then the last one is lifting and touching on the way through. So they're the three different ways that your front wheel can interact with the obstacle. When we lift and touch on the way through, it tends to be more about driving the bike. So accelerating before the front wheel actually touches and then bringing the bike to containment, as I was saying earlier. So this is kind of how we would drive the bike in, bring the bike to containment, and then get the lift after the drive. So driving first, then containing. It'll be very hard to see on the video, and I'll show you some more slow-mos in a sec, but it's drive, drive in. So that is probably a bit hard to see. Now, the driving in is very much how a lot of the European trials riders tell you to ride obstacles. It's a really effective and efficient way to ride obstacles, and it's a very common way for all the enduro riders to ride obstacles. Because the enduro bikes have such a long stroke and suspension, it's harder for you to use your body. It's much harder for you to lift and drop your body. If you're a flea weight like me, if you're 70 kilos or less, if you're shorter as well and you don't have the height to lift yourself above the bike, you can't use your body as effectively on the bigger bikes. As the bike gets larger, you have less and less effect over the bike. So how are you going to bring the bike to a stop if your body doesn't have much effect over the bike? The only way is to use the engine and use the momentum to get the bike into the compressed state and to do the work for you. So you tend on the enduro bikes to ride in and let the momentum and the power do the work. So, which I'm going to come back to in a sec. So I'll grab the enduro bike and demo that. I'll give it a bit Bit of a warm up first. It's actually very cold here in Perth. Whoop. There's a question, Jeff? Yeah.
Mix asked, what body position is happening once you have driven into the obstacle, i.e. standing up like the ride technique?
Yeah, essentially, it's the same as the standing action, but with ride technique, the big difference is you're pulling on the bars. So I'll come back to that in a sec. Just remind me to come back to it. So this is, as you'll see, I'm going to drive much more into the step, let the momentum and the power do its work. Whoop. It's a bit messy. I really should ride the Enduro bike a bit more. That's better. Now, because I don't have a great deal of body weight, it's much harder for me to lift and put the body down into it. If I do push down into the bike, it doesn't have much effect because the dampers on an Enduro bike, they're designed to take, 80 km/h square edges. So the damper is designed to take a lot of kinetic energy and convert it into heat and to remove it from the situation. So if I use my body, it's really ineffective. Now, when it comes to actually training, I think you still want to do the McDonald's arches. But before I step into that, I'll answer Mick's question. So with ride technique and splatting, it's very much focused on the leverage. So we're doing this action. Now, if you're going to do the McDonald's arches, any point in time where you're lifting the front wheel, you'll notice that it's actually a very small RSG beforehand. So you do a little RSG to pick the front wheel up and to place it. Now with punch technique, we want the bike compressed. So the only difference is that when we come down on the bike, we will push down with our arms. The legs are going to still do the same work because they're pushing you up, but the arms are going to push down on the handlebars. And one of the key points to learning this is you want to actually focus on the compression of the fork. The compression, if you get the compression in the fork, you will generally get the compression in the back of the bike. So if the fork achieves it, the back of the bike will achieve it and it will bring it to that stopped state. Now, if the back of the bike isn't fully compressed, if you're on the Enduro and it's really long, you'll notice, I'm going to show you in a second the video of it, you'll notice that the chain tension will actually pull the back of the bike down, which I'll show you in another slow-mo, which will make far more sense. But before I do, I will ride this as a McDonald's arch on the Enduro bike. If I can time it, I feel so bad on the bike tonight. Well, that worked all right. I thought I'd totally missed the mark. Too far back. And that oil's a bit slippery. But hopefully that gives you the picture of what I'm talking about. Now, I'm going to jump over to the computer now and give you some examples, some various examples from other bits of riding, and we'll talk through them. So I will jump to camera 2. Can you bring that down to there?
Oh,
just pull the phone out of that and put it in that. And so with this one here, That's just the typical McDonald's arch. The front wheel has been lifted from here somewhere. The front wheel has done, whoop, I'll draw better than that. The front wheel has done an action like this, which gives me and the bike the falling momentum to compress the bike, the preloading of the bike, and my body and the bike drops. And then from here, my hands and legs push down into the bike, my body weight gets pushed up, and the clutch gets released. So from that position, the bike will lift really nicely up into the air. If I go to this one, this shows the Enduro bike, and there's two here. There's the trials bike, the Enduro bike first, and then we go to the trials bike. But I've actually got the audio file underneath, so you can see the revs here that are underneath. The red line here will play across the moment on the video. When we come in on the Enduro bike, we lift it in the air, exactly the same action. When the bike is dropping, you'll notice that the RPM is just about to come on. So the RPM comes on, I begin to stand, and then the clutch is released. So I'll just zoom in on this. From that point to that point is the whole RSG action. Revs, as you can see down the bottom, are on first. Standing is initiated a split second later, and then the clutch is still in at the moment, then the clutch is released after the fact. So it's still rev, squat, and go. It makes it very clear. That pattern is still there. It just happens in a very, very short space in time, in a very short window in time. So, and then from there, you'll notice that from just here, at this moment, the clutch has not been released. I'll zoom in so you can see the clutch finger here, and there's the little silver ball there on my finger. You can see, you should be able to see at home there, the extension of the finger at that moment. So that's where the release of the clutch occurs. The standing has already initiated. But if you watch, from the moment that I release the clutch, you watch the back of the bike as we go through. The back of the bike gets pulled all the way down to bottomed out because the energy needs to be contained. So at this moment here, the forks are pretty well contained. The front wheel can't go anywhere, the front brake's on. But because I'm such a flea weight and I haven't had much compression onto the bike and I haven't got it completely bottomed, the chain tension is pulling the back of the bike down and is locking out the energy and finding its point of containment. Once it finds that, then it will lift. So it's essentially like I've come in and I've put my hand over that pipe, even though it was still flowing, for want of a word. So from here, you'll see that bike gets compressed right down to, say, here. The front wheel's trying to break free of the log, which totally makes sense. And if you have a look at the back of the bike, you can see how loose the chain is because this tension here is huge. It's really, really high, and that's been pulling the bike. And it's not until the moment where the bike is completely bottomed that the lift occurs from that. And the lift is fairly effective. You can see the back wheel comes off the ground and not quite as big as the trials bike, but the effective lift is from, you don't want to look, if you're ever doing this and gauging your own lift, don't gauge it off your tires. You want to look at the combined mass of the rider and the bike and how high that goes. So I'm just going to do this roughly. Obviously nothing's to scale, but let's just say rider mass and bike mass is about there, and then we go all the way through to where we connect to the log, and it's up here. So it's lifted quite a way. It's lifted that distance up, which doesn't look much on the video, but that's, you know, It's probably a good half a metre in real life, something like that. So that hopefully that clarifies a few of the points that I was talking about. Now this is an example of carrying the momentum into the step. Whoa. And we can slow it down here. So the front wheel lifts and I ride in, and then my momentum and the bike's momentum compresses the bike, and then once it's contained, the clutch is popped again, that's just habit, but then the bike lifts nicely onto the step. So just a bit cleaner example of the momentum carrying in rather than me trying to do it here. And after this, I've got a example here of stationary, which we're not going to go into tonight, but I'll bring it back here. Now, this is stationary punching, and I've just jumped the audio over to you guys so you can hear this. I'll bring it back here and press play. Listen to the audio here. You'll notice that when I'm back, the RPM comes on first. RPM, pull in, push into the bike and stand, then the clutch release. So it's still rev, squat, revving there, squatting and standing from that moment. So I initiate the stand and then I clutch release. And when I do it, I'm not trying to jump the back wheel to the top. I want the back wheel to connect nice and early. So as a visual example, I think it's a good example of showing how we don't always want maximum lift. If we get maximum lift, we then can't connect to the face very well. Like what I did on the concrete, when I stopped with the front wheel really low, I got heaps of lift, but I connected to the face really poorly. And good obstacle riding technique is lift plus climb. It's not just lift alone. So hopefully that all makes sense. Oh, sorry, Jess?
We have a question.
Have a question?
Yes. Do you pull in the clutch when you are driving up? Are you riding the clutch or just keeping it out?
It's essentially left out. It really doesn't matter what you do after that moment. You need to leave it out for the bike to then connect to the face and the drive that's coming in to actually do its job. Sometimes though, you're actually pulling the clutch in completely. So to give you an example, I've got a pipe at the top of the hill here where I practice, and it's painted and it's on an angle. It's incredibly slippery. If there's any moisture, the clay gets drawn onto it, and there's no traction on that pipe. And we have to create enough lift at the bottom to be able to roll all the way over the top. And what ends up happening, this is the bit that kind of helps your head with this, is that you can either pull the clutch in and allow the bike to completely roll, but you don't need to pull it all the way in, because when you let the clutch go, all of the inertia of the motor has been delivered to the back wheel. And you'll find that the motor will slow down to match the speed of the wheel. So when you've let the clutch out and you've delivered all the inertia from the motor, the motor and the tyre are matching in speed, and the momentum and the speed which you're travelling out tends to pretty well match. So even on slippery stuff, you'll be rolling, but the tyre is turning with the motor at the same speed you're travelling at. So it tends not to break the traction. But that's the point where you start managing the engine power being delivered from the next ignition to blend that in. So when you're out, you'll then take the load back up by releasing the clutch once there's something there to work with. So it tends to be pop the clutch, leave it out, and then as it comes in, you tend to bring in a touch or let it out to find the connection point once you're on the face, provided there's some traction to work with. So on something really slippery, you might completely pull it in and allow it to totally roll. Something with traction, like this one here, you can probably see it actually if I go back to it. You won't see the clutch finger, but there the back wheel's freely rolling, and you'll see here that the back wheel's not rolling very fast. It hits the face, and then I will take the load again because I want the back wheel to drive, and it's going to be about here, because there the back wheel will be spinning, the clutch is out, you can see it spin, and then that moment there, I want that tyre to reconnect once the body weight comes on it, just there. So it's spinning all the way up there. There's some drive from the motor. It's driving and then, and that will be held on the clutch and metered on the clutch to deliver the torque that the motor does have. And this is where the RPM of the motor can go incredibly low. So if you don't have the, I mean, you're not going to be able to do this in the first place if you don't have extremely good clutch control, but that's the point where clutch control just does everything. And the RPM may go way below idle on the bike will sound like it's almost stalled, but there's enough there to actually just creep yourself forward and get up on top. So hopefully that has answered your question. Was there any others, Jess?
No, just comments on how good you're doing.
Oh, cool bananas. Hope it's all right. I feel like tonight's delivery was absolutely terrible. I feel like it was a bit all over the place. So apologies for that. I'll do better. So one of the things that there's two more things that I'd like to touch on, and that is the simple and effective means of riding obstacles by blending ride and punch. This is what you're going to see in the vast majority of cases online. Most riders and most situations will favour a blending of ride and punch technique. Any time that the obstacle goes from ramps to very sharp in the bottom corner, you want to create some really effective lift before you get to the face. So in this corner, you don't want the back wheel to drop down, so you want some really good lift in those moments. Ride technique works really, really well, and it's really effective. And like I've said, it's a much easier technique to learn and to develop, and it's a stepping stone as well. You have to do that before you learn punch technique. Ultimately, you really need to dial in RSG first, get that absolutely dialed. Then you need really good ride technique. Then you need to be able to do RSG with your front brake on. Then you can start working toward punch after that. And generally, it'll be ride technique, which we haven't covered this in detail, but placing the front wheel on top of the obstacle and then using ride technique from that. So it teaches you to control the front brake, place the front and then go. And then you'll bring the front down the obstacle and work into punch technique. So it needs to come in that order. Now, when we want really effective lift, we can lift and touch the front and create really effective punch. And when we're doing ride technique, we're going to do that sort of a step, it creates a lot of rotation, which means that when you ride the step, it tends to be a bit more violent, but the front tends to carry high, and we don't always want that. Sometimes we want the bike to stay nice and level. So when we punch, it's a really effective way to deal with very sharp corners. And the longer your suspension, the more effective this is. So you'll see enduro riders will go front wheel first into pretty much everything. Yeah, Jess?
We have a question from John C. How do you decide which technique to apply to which obstacle?
Very, very good question, which I'm going to cover in another video. It needs another video on its own. But what we're judging off is the cross-sectional shape of the obstacle. So if the obstacle was, say that's the ground, and the obstacle's kicked back like this, and it's undercut for you. If you're going to do ride technique, you can do it, but it's going to need to be really, really effective lift where the back wheel has to come off the ground. And then it's going to go right underneath, and there's going to be a hell of a lot of rotation, and it's going to be a really big body movement. Now, if that's a bit lower and it's not too high, you'll be able to hit the front on that and use the bike to allow the bike to drive into it to create the lift. So that's potentially one way. If it's too high, if you can't do that effectively, well, then you're going to have to splat it. If it's lower than that, and you could use ride or punch on it potentially, essentially punch technique is in those places where you want the lift to be level, not have to rely so much on the drive up the face. And the other one that you'll use to judge whether or not to use it is the efficiency. So you'll see a lot of high-level riders, they will choose to punch technique pretty much everywhere because it's extremely efficient and effective. It needs very little actual physical energy. It just requires the timing. And a lot of riders will shy away from punch technique within their training and practice. But the reality is it's one of the more reachable techniques that we use within riding. So pretty much everyone has the ability to do it, provided you get the timing. If you build your timing, it'll work fine. You don't need the physical ability. Splatting, because it's so leverage focused and it's very body oriented, you need a very strong posterior chain. If you don't have that, splatting's literally off the cards. You can't do it. It's got to be then ride technique or punch technique. So hopefully that wasn't too much of a politician answer for you. Was it John?
John.
Hopefully, John, it wasn't too much of a politician's answer for you and it answers it. The cross-sectional shape, sometimes the traction, punch technique really effectively creates a lot of traction in a very short window. How much run-up you have, cross-sectional shape, how level you want to stay. If you're going to punch something and you need the front to stay relatively low, it allows your body to be really back on the bike and push the bike in front of you without the rotation. So then you can place the front really nicely. There are a number of different ways, I guess. So, cool bananas. Is there any other questions there? No?
Yet.
So getting back to what I was saying, a lot of riders will use this, higher level riders will use it a lot. And it's really the go-to technique once you've learnt it because it's so simple and effective, especially on small stuff. And because of the way that we deliver the energy via the clutch, we can also use it to change the attitude of the bike. So you can ride in and you can punch and create lots of lift with the back wheel and land with your front wheel down and your back wheel on top of the log, ready to drive straight afterwards. So if it's small and you want to move quick, in trials sections, where we're riding it, and because we have time limits, we'll often use that to maintain a quick movement through the section and effective and efficient. And it saves a lot of energy. On the enduro bikes, because you have so much suspension, you can allow the momentum and the power of the bike to do all the work for you fundamentally, and it saves you having to really put effort in. Now, if you're going to step into this and learn it, as I said, you want to do RSG and you want to get ride technique and that dialed first. You then want to be doing ride technique with the front brake on. But when you're going to actually learn punch technique, I highly, highly recommend that you do it by learning the McDonald's arch, lifting and dropping the bike onto the obstacle. And because when you do this, it allows you to explore the full range of movement. If you don't get the full compression, if your brain doesn't experience the complete stop of the bike, you're going to struggle to adapt it to things in the wild. Your brain needs to feel and experience that complete stop, because when you do it, you're stopping against an obstacle, like I was on that concrete pipe, and your brain feels the anxiety because you're stopping and the obstacle's up here. It's completely wrong. It doesn't make sense. So you need to get your brain comfortable with the reality that you're going to be very anxious in the moment, and you need to wait for everything to come to the stop and then trust you're going to get the lift. If you don't learn the McDonald's arches first, it puts a glass ceiling in your riding later on. Now, I've experienced this with at least 10 different riders, and then what we've got to do is we've got to take them all the way back to the beginning and start afresh, get them doing the McDonald's arches, and then they will break free of it. Especially if you're a higher level trials rider, if you're going to be doing this from a stationary position, you really, really need to learn to lift and drop first as the starting point. So, there's another question?
Yes, we do. We've actually got a couple, so just bear with me.
Cool bananas. Awesome, guys.
Their questions are oh, yes, they are.
So just before we go into those questions, that's my lot for tonight. So hopefully this has all made sense to you. It's quite a bit, so you probably want to go back over it. But don't stress, because we're going to break things down further in future videos to give you a deeper understanding of it. So this is just I want you to understand that this is all cohesive and there's a full map there.
So from Duncan first,
Yep.
hi, great videos. With the punch technique, are you pulling the front brake every time? And if so, how are you pulling the brake and revving the bike at the same time?
Great question. Really, really good question. This is something that I've learned in the last 2 years, especially because I've been experimenting with all this stuff for quite a few years now to truly understand, especially the blockers that riders themselves face. There's some real big blockers that as a rider, it's in you as a human, not necessarily mechanical stuff. And one of them is the ability to rev and use the front brake at the same time and independently. This is one of the big reasons why I detest anything like a clake, not the clakes where the clutch is independent to the rear brake. They are great. They're actually a really good tool. But the clakes where the rear brake and the clutch is included as one, where it's clutch then rear brake, and you can't separate the controls, I really don't like that at all. Where we use the throttle and the front brake completely independently. And when I'm landing, I'm pretty much always using the front brake. It is very, very rare that I am not using the front brake in some way. It's really just what percentage of front brake am I using? Am I using 5% or 60% or, you know? So we use it a lot and we vary it. And it's also ramped depending on the shape. Now, this is getting really, really advanced, but depending on the shape of the obstacle, sometimes we'll actually ramp, increase or decrease the ramping based on the shape of the cross-sectional shape of the obstacle and where your front wheel's hitting. So we're using those independently. It's something, like I was saying, in the last 2 years, it's blown me away how much trouble riders have had getting past that point. So that's a part of how I develop it. So hopefully that's answered your question.
Now, Brenton and Jess from Tasmania.
Oh, hey guys, how you going?
A question from Brenton.
Yes, yes.
He said, was there any front or rear brake taps? Now, I don't know if that's supposed to be taps or tricks.
Yep, taps. Yep.
In any of the setup process before the lift?
Oh, sorry, in terms of placing the front wheel? So when we're lifting and placing, I will use the rear brake a lot with initial lift. When we do, if you look back at the previous videos with RSG and that, it's counterintuitive. You think touching the rear brake is actually going to reduce the lift, but it doesn't. It assists the lift because when you touch the rear brake, the drive of the back wheel pushes the swing arm down, which gets us into that position where the release of the clutch then helps the lift. So on the approach, the initial lift of the front wheel, I tend to touch the rear brake a bit. Depends on the situation. I like to train riders through to be using both independently, so just with the front brake, just with the rear brake, and then both combined. So we'll do RSG front only, RSG rear only, RSG with both brakes combined. And you'll feel with both bikes, both brakes, it's more effective because when you're braking, what it does is it pulls the bike down, sets the geometry, but because the forks move this way and the rear swing arm moves this way, it kind of pulls the bike apart. So whilst it sets up the geometry really well, the bike doesn't drop too low. So you're not trying to pick the bike up off the ground, it sets the geometry, doesn't drop the chassis too low, and then scoops the bike up really nicely. Once the front wheel's in the air, the majority of the accuracy for the placement, so the dropping of the front wheel, the majority is done on the clutch. Like I would say 80+% is done on the clutch. And then just a touch is done on the rear brake, depending. Now, I've got to the point where my rear brake is really an unconscious action, but I've videotaped it and I've felt it and I notice when I'm doing it. Especially on the Enduro bike. I find I do it more on the Enduro bike because there's so much mass and there's so much power in the Enduro bikes. I tend to overshoot all the time because I don't ride them much. So hopefully, Brendan, that answers the question there. Hope you guys are doing really well in Tassie too and Jess is kicking your butt too. Any other questions, Jess?
No.
No? Awesome, guys. So hopefully that all makes sense to you. I won't waffle on too much longer unless you want to jump in and ask any other questions. To kind of just cover back over, the lift mechanism is by stopping the bike, containing all the energy, really important point, and that gives us that really nice vertical lift and horizontal lift, so the bike doesn't rotate too much. It's really, really effective way to generate lift, and it's so adaptable to so many different situations. There is the purest form, like I've said, which sits on the point of the triangular spectrum of obstacle riding. And of course, we can reduce the lift, which brings it more toward ride technique, which starts blending the two of them. You can lift the front wheel and drop it as a McDonald's arch. You can use the momentum to carry in. You can touch the front and power into the step. And the bike can be brought to a stop and then deliver the energy, or you can be delivering the energy and then contain the bike to generate the stop. So it's an incredible technique to learn, takes a hell of a lot of time. I reckon this took me completely by myself in Western Australia watching VHS tapes in like 1997, something like that, maybe 96. I reckon it took me the best part of 2 years non-stop working on it to get it happening. And then I reckon it took another 2 years to effectively get to the point where I'd say I'd perfected it. I think in the long term, I ended up being one of the better riders in Australia at it. The only person I've really seen that's better than me at it is Craig Austin and Scott Owen. Scott Owen is just like, was incredible at it, a trials rider in Victoria. So hopefully all of this waffle has helped you in some way. Is there another question, Jess? Or?
No, it definitely has. We had one comment, well actually two, from @7.
Yep.
He said it was the best explanation or example of the double arches and
oh, cool.
his scene.
Awesome, loving it. Well, I won't waffle on too much more here. You can keep commenting in. I will try to jump back to the comments in the next couple of days and answer everyone who's commented on the other videos as well. I'll leave it there for tonight. Thank you very much for attending. My name's Neil Price. I hope you ride better.